All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome, folks who are joining us here in person and those who are joining virtually on YouTube, to the City of Summerside Planning Board meeting of August 12th, 2024, here in beautiful downtown Summerside on a lovely early August evening. I'll begin by calling the meeting to order here at 6:01 p.m. And first, I will call for a motion from a member of Planning Board to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Morrison, second. Councillor Snow. All members of Planning Board, which involves Councillor Duran, Councillor Morrison, Councillor Snow, and myself, in support of the agenda as presented, please indicate by saying aye. 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 Any opposed? Hearing none, we'll proceed with the agenda as it is. At the beginning of each one of our meetings, we ask any member of council or member of planning board to declare a conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda this evening. Hearing none, and there should be none as this is our fourth meeting on this topic. We'll proceed. We begin each one of our meetings here in the City of Summerside by acknowledging that the land upon which we gather is the unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Abogway is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship. We pay respects to the indigenous Mi'kmaq people who have occupied this island for over 12,000 years, past, present, and future. I'd also take a note that that clock in the lobby is now fixed, as you can all hear the dinging at the front entrance to City Hall, and I certainly heard about that a couple of months ago. So whoever fixed the clock, thank you. Yeah, so we're going to begin. We'll move on to item 5, which is the report and recommendations. I'll just do a really brief couple of quick points here for this evening. First of all, as I said at the outset, welcome to everyone who is here. Your participation, your feedback, your insight, your thoughts is important and is an important part of this process and has been an important part of this process since the beginning. We are incredibly fortunate to be able to live in a place and in a country where we can discuss and talk about difficult issues, complicated issues, things that affect all of us in all different ways, in a peaceful, thoughtful, and respectful manner. So that has been the course of the path that we have sort of taken here as a community over the past number of years, and I really think it is, we're really fortunate to be able to have that opportunity because so many certainly do not. So welcome and thank you for being part of all of this. As well, I've had to do this a couple times, and I hate having to pull the gavel out if I ever had to, that's back behind here that is broken, and enforce some of our rules and decorum. So I'm going to just set it out at the very beginning and then just ask everyone hopefully to follow along. Our rules, our procedural rules here in chambers restrict any yelling from the audience, any applause, cheering, boos, all that kind of stuff. It's not a sports arena, unfortunately, sometimes. So I just ask you all to respect that. It doesn't restrict you from providing any suitable hand gestures. I've never seen anyone do it, but thumbs up, thumbs down, I suppose, is perfectly fine. You'd be well within the rules. But I just ask that we try and restrict any kinds of applause or frustration, and if you do have frustration and want to vent it, I just ask you to sort of step out or to share it by email or phone call with any one of us after the meeting. As well, Councillor Duran, the Chair of Planning Board, will go over where we are at in the process on all of this. But tonight is not a come stand up at the open mic night. That happens earlier in the process, but what I want to make sure that everybody fully understands is that until council makes its final vote and final decision, which will not happen here tonight, there is the opportunity to put in writing via email, via Facebook, by phone, by telephone, in person, with any member of council, any of your comments, concerns, or questions, and those concerns and questions will be addressed and responded to. So I want to let you know that the opportunity for input continues and has to continue until council makes a final vote on the subject. And it's really important to be able to share your thoughts and concerns and questions because it's a very valuable and important part of the process, as we'll see tonight. Some changes proposed here this evening have come from that. And with that, I will hand it over to our Chair of Planning Board, Councillor Duran. Councillor?
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. And I guess just to build on what you mentioned about the where we are in the process, we did start the public engagement sort of open house series earlier in the year, but the official sort of process began with our last meeting of council, which sort of was our first opportunity to present this in its entirety. So at that point, council moved it to the planning board, which is this evening, and we'll sort of get some additional feedback, and we'll go over some of the changes that we made since that meeting, and then council's final decision on the matter, whether planning board votes to endorse it this evening or not. It is a decision that's made by council, not just the 4 members of planning board. So so that final decision will take place, I believe, at the August monthly council meeting, which is it's the 3rd Monday of the month. I believe it's next Monday, week from today. So, yeah. Of course, yeah, we're going to do the presentation again that we did at the last meeting. Sam and Janice are here from viii, and after that we'll go through the report itself and the recommendation, and yeah, we'll go through the process. So I guess I will hand it over to Sam and Janice of viii, and viii will listen to the again, as well as everyone joining us. So take it away.
All right, I'll start. Thank you, Councillor Duran. Sam Murphy and myself, Janice Harper, are here to present Planning Board with the background behind proposed changes to the official plan and bylaw to facilitate gentle density in Summerside. We are both professional land use planners, 2 out of a team of 6 who have been working on this project in various stages since the beginning of this year. The reason for the changes. The lack of access to housing is a national issue, and Summerside is now tasked with addressing a lack of housing stock to meet a variety of needs in the city. The old official plan was developed for a different era. Many tools now are available to help manage change with an approach to gentle density, and we're going to look at some options this evening. The context for these changes goes back almost 2 decades when the city developed a plan for the east-west connector, which is currently now under construction. As late as last year, 2023, the Mayor's Task Force on Attainable Housing recently confirmed that the city does not have enough housing stock to support workers or residents. Funding for this initiative, the Housing Accelerator Fund, was approved in December of 2023. And the changes that are proposed to deal with essentially densification and the ability to make changes to accommodate a variety of housing types is in response to the need for housing, and this was going to happen anyways, but the funding has made it possible to proceed in an efficient manner. And we're at a point tonight where we're looking at current official plan amendments and a new bylaw. And it's noted as spring 2024 on this slide because that's when this particular process started. And there are future phases to be addressed in the future. More reason for changes. The current and growing need for housing. The lack of housing will continue to impact residents across the board. Workers need housing, and if housing is not available, workers will choose to locate elsewhere. Workers, of course, include grocery store clerks, healthcare workers, teachers, early childhood educators, and skilled tradespeople. People will delay starting families if they cannot afford access to housing. Seniors will no longer, and those in the full-time workforce will not move out of traditional homes if they do not have stable and desirable alternatives. A fire or a flood, which might make a dwelling unsuitable for habitation, is disastrous. Currently, there are very few housing options available in the short to medium term. I would like to ponder, where would each of us go with our families if our home was to burn down tomorrow? Would we be able to continue to work in the medium term? And we make the point that's bolded on the slide, even among the comfortably housed, many residents are one life away from a life event with housing insecurity. And we will not be able to meet the housing supply and affordability need by focusing on new developments only, or by simply building faster. We need a multi-pronged approach. Resident needs, as defined, are a primary driver for change. People need housing options and housing choices in order to meet different stages in life. Under sustainability, very low density development patterns challenge the affordability of municipal roads, water, and sewer. Maintenance of municipal infrastructure is already a concern. The cost of maintenance continues to rise. In order to avoid increasing taxes or service fees, it makes sense to utilize existing roads, water, and sewer lines more efficiently. The CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund, the main focus of this fund is to provide more housing faster. This is in response to the need as defined across the country, as well as here in Summerside. 14 initiatives have been designed to facilitate a variety of options in the city, and an agreement, as people are most likely aware, was signed in December of 2023. In Summerside, generally, Council has committed to increasing housing options across the city to allow for more flexibility in meeting the clearly identified need for housing. This need impacts all generations, from seniors who might want to downsize or move in with extended family members, to younger working-aged adults who may delay taking a job or starting a family due to unstable housing. Council has committed to a number of initiatives, 14 in total, but we're here focusing on initial initiatives, and these initiatives are listed on the slides above. Maybe I'll turn it over to you. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll shift gears a little bit. This is the second planning board meeting, and again, the focus of that is to look at amendments to the official plan and the new zoning bylaw, as well as a small change to both the future land use map and the zoning map. And these are all in pursuit of those objectives to increase the housing supply and to meet the conditions that were set out in the CMHC funding. So the Housing Accelerator Fund, the reason that Summerside pursued this, and it is a city initiative, has been laid out already by Janice, but we'll note that the housing need is already there. So this funding is allowing the city to pursue the need that's already been identified, where this work is not in order to receive the funding allows the city to do the work. There are multiple stages of funding and work that were identified in the city's proposals to CMHC when the application was made. And there are deadlines associated with each phase. So we have targets all the way along that are being watched by CMHC as part of the agreement the city entered into. There are core conditions on the funding. There are 4 main ones that apply that are absolutely required for the city to receive the funding from the federal government. Those 4 are to end exclusionary zoning, which is zoning with principally one or 2 small uses. To permit 4 units as of right in every zone in the city, to allow at least 4 stories within 500 meters of Holland College, so densification around post-secondary schools, and permitting accessory dwelling units. So those are conditions that the city has agreed to meet. The other core funding initiatives that are part of the program, even if they're not tied into your funding agreement, are applied to any municipality who's participating in the HAF program. And these, as we mentioned earlier, are more missing middle housing, a full housing spectrum, so making sure that all of those choices are there, a faster, more predictable process, promoting affordability and equity, and working towards a complete community. So that's walkable communities, communities that are low carbon and climate resilient. So we've seen a little bit of this, but I do want to add the part that's about the public engagement. So we've had the open house in 2023 associated with the task force on attainable housing. There was a public presentation of that report back in 2023, I believe it was in November. And then when we moved into this stage, there was an open house in May. There was information posted to the website with letters and a notice in the media about the meeting that was held on June 19th. There was additional engagement at the Credit Union Place in June and the beginning of July, and then there was the July meeting of Planning Board. So there's been a number of meetings to date, as has already been mentioned. We aren't going to go through every component of this in detail. You've heard us present it already, but we do want to really highlight the areas that have changed since the July meeting. One of those is on the official plan side, and I will note that we're proposing amendments to policies in the official plan as opposed to a whole new official plan at this stage. But the change that has come since July is to add additional wording about design standards and design guidelines, so that as we do the future phases of the HAF initiatives, the wording will already be there. We had some already, but we've beefed that up a bit. The other official plan amendments are really about just, again, increasing the density choice, but these are enabling policy statements to support what we put into the bylaw itself. Again, won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but we did present some examples of what missing middle or that sort of low-density, ground-oriented housing looks like or could look like, and there'll be more work on this in the future phases. The east-west connector that we've mentioned is the other key component of this work, and we've created a new CDA zone that would allow for different uses along that roadway, and I'll get into more detail when we talk about the bylaw. So again, to sum that part of it up, there's not a lot of change since July in the official plan itself, just a couple of additional statements about the design standards and guidelines. With the zoning bylaw, as noted, it is a whole new bylaw, partly because the number of changes are sort of interwoven through every part, and to read an amendment to the bylaw would have been incredibly complicated. The initiatives that we're focusing on immediately are the accessory dwelling units, the 4 units as of right in all zones, eliminating exclusionary zoning, so the conditions that are coming from the federal government as part of the funding agreement, the densification around Holland College, and then the east-west connector. Accessory dwelling units haven't changed much since our presentation in July. The concept is that both will be permitted, that they'll be compatible with the main unit, and there are new development standards to guide how they are developed. Again, no changes on garden suites since July, but we did in June note that we've changed the rear yard setback, so it's been increased slightly, and we've clarified separation distances, being that they're dependent on the National Building Code. And no changes since July on the secondary suites. With the lower density residential zones, the main change is about what the higher density in that middle gentle density category would look like. But the permitted uses hasn't changed since July, but we did want to highlight, because it has been a question, that there's no change to the maximum height from what you have in your current bylaw. So I know that's been a question. The change to these zones since July is that there is a new requirement added that row house, townhouse, and apartments be reviewed for compatibility in the opinion of the development officer, because these are permitted uses, especially in relation to height and streetscape. So there will be that consideration, and this was a large amount of the discussion back in July about how that fits into the neighborhood. With the R3 zone, the changes since July primarily relate to the number of units that are as of right, and if we go to the next screen, it's described in more detail. So we had, in your current bylaw, it is discretionary permits, the apartments and row houses and townhouses. We had proposed 8 units for the row houses and townhouses. We now have 6 units, so it's a slight decrease in the number of units permitted as of right, and up to 8 would now return to being discretionary. So it's sort of a middle ground between what you have now and what was presented in July. And then we do have a similar concept about compatibility, but this is your medium density zone, so it is only for the units that are discretionary, so those ones that would come to council. No changes have been proposed to the R4 zone since July. So again, it's 6 stories. It's more options in this area, but it has not changed since the last time this has been presented. The east-west connector, there was a certain amount of discussion last time on this as well. And so if you recall, we had one parcel that was identified by a star. We've changed this approach slightly, and we have a 3rd district. We originally had the connector nodes and the connector corridor. So there is now a connector transition district. And that is immediately adjacent to the Walker Drive area. And you can see it will have, we can do a bigger map after if needed. And in that zone, the permitted uses would be those permitted in the R3 zone only.
Can I just ask a question? I'm sorry. I'm trying to see, is there a map up there so the residents can see?
We have maps at the end of the,
Okay.
we have maps at the very end.
And the
Yes,
next-
I know we have them, but.
Yeah, at the end
Yeah.
of the slideshow, we have maps. Yeah.
But if we go to the next slide, there's a slightly bigger, that's potentially a little easier to see. So it's the parcel that had been started in June or July, as well as a little bit on the back end of the same parcels. So the primary change to this component of the bylaw is that it would be R3 uses only in that District 3. And then the change that we had discussed back in July, which was if a parcel is immediately adjacent to a parcel that has an existing residential dwelling on it with a September 1st date to have a date somewhere, that would be limited to 4 stories. So that step back after the 4th story was eliminated if it's immediately adjacent to a developed property. So again, trying to find a little way of providing that buffer that was discussed. So the Holland College buffer has not changed since the presentation in July. Again, 4 stories where the underlying zone would not have allowed 4 stories before. If the underlying zone allows more than 4 stories, then that would still be permitted. And the other changes that we've presented in the past, broader wording about modular buildings for all building forms, refinements for ancillary residences, so that's where you might have an apartment as part of a business or something where it's really secondary but to support the activity. So these are really almost more housekeeping and trying to make sure your bylaw moves smoothly. Increase in approval time limits from 12 months to 24 months, and just some changes to language terminology. So we've been through those ones before, and there have been no changes since July. So to summarize what has been proposed in the blue is the changes that were put in place between June and July, and then the sort of rows are the changes since the July Planning Board meeting. So for the official plan, there were a couple of changes back in July. You'll remember there was a change in terminology in a table that had to be fixed just for consistency, and a removal of 2 policies in the CDA area, again for consistency. And then, as I mentioned, the additional references to design guidelines and standards since the July meeting. And then for the bylaw, again back in June, there was the rear yard setback and separation distances. Then since July, there's the review for compatibility, and the 6 units, row and townhouses permitted, with the up to 8 going to discretionary, and a compatibility review for the discretionary up to 8 unit permits. The additional height restrictions in the CDA was from June, and the new connector transition district with R3 uses is the change to the CDA since July. So to summarize, bring it all back together, there is one amendment document, OP39, that has been prepared with all of those changes to the official plan, which also includes the only map change is to put in place that CDA for the east-west connector. The bylaw is an entirely new bylaw, but the changes are those, the ones that we've highlighted for you. And again, the map, the only change there would be that east-west connector would be zoned as CDA. We did note in July that there are a number of other initiatives that come up as future phases. We, again, are on a timeline with the agreement that the city has with CMHC to look at some of the other elements, which includes design guidelines for accessory dwelling units and zoning for vulnerable populations and missing middle, some incentive programs, and looking at things like floodplain mapping and a climate change adaptation plan. So the next steps for this process is the decision tonight by planning board on whether or not to recommend these documents to council, and then council would make their decisions. And if it's approved, it goes to the province. The minister has to sign off on any official plan and bylaw amendments, and then work would continue on the future phases of the HAF initiatives. So that really is the summary of what's happened since July. We can open it up to discussion. It doesn't actually have the District 3 enlarged, so we can go back to the other one if needed, but I don't know if...
Yeah, it doesn't have it enlarged.
And I don't think there's a way to enlarge what you see on the screen, is there? No, sorry.
But I have these maps just so that people are aware. We do have some maps as part at the end of the slideshow if we have to refer to them if anyone has questions, including...
Yeah, that's what the CDA will look like in your zoning map. So.
Yeah.
So with that, I will hand it back to you for any discussion and questions.
Okay, thank you, Janice and Sam, once again. Any questions or comments from council? Councillor Adams.
Okay, I just have a few questions. First of all, I wanted to ask what I do with all the letters and emails that I received. I know everything, just so everybody knows, everything that I've received, the many emails, texts I've sent to all of council, and I printed them off. So what do we do so those
so
are
Brian
in the record?
has them as well, but they're
Okay.
going to be, of course, we have them that you forwarded to us. They're going to all be part of the council package at that council meeting,
Okay, the next
which will be
council
available
meeting.
to everyone.
I just
Yeah.
wanted people to know, and people are watching at home, just what the information
Yeah.
they sent in is.
So you've received a large number of them, and you've forwarded them to us every time. But those will all be included in
Perfect.
the next main council package as well
Okay.
for the public to read as well.
Excellent. And people can keep sending them
Yeah.
until the next meeting.
Yeah, any email that anyone sends to mayor, council, I believe even staff, they'll, unless you
Yeah.
request, not to share this publicly, they'll all be compiled and made available to us and everyone else publicly as well,
Right.
so, yeah.
Right, because it's so hard to get the message out now with it when we don't have the newspaper on a regular basis and so on. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows and to spread the word that you can still send in letters, because I was asked that quite a few times over the past week. So I do have 3 or 4 questions as well. How do you want to do this?
Yeah, I'd like to do this by reading in the planning report and the actual recommendation for planning board. Then because it's a planning board meeting, having planning board members provide initial comments, and then we'll open it to all of council for comments, and then planning board can provide closing and vote. If that's okay, that gives
Perfect.
everybody
Yep.
good opportunity and a path. So with that, Councillor
Yeah, sure.
Duran, it would be your reading
Yeah,
of the
so,
planning
yeah.
report and then the recommendation, which we have
Sure.
to read into the record.
So, the recommendation, planning board recommendation, the purpose of the proposed amendments to the city's official plan and zoning bylaw are to facilitate the accelerated creation of housing in the city and are required to meet commitments made as part of funding received under the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund, HAF. Amendments to the official plan and a new zoning bylaw, complete with required maps, have been prepared for council consideration. Please see the attached planning board report prepared by the WE6 Planning Group for a detailed overview. And everything that's referenced here is available for anyone to either in print or download. The official plan amendment, OP 39, the background, a series of strategic amendments have been prepared for the official plan to bring the existing official plan in line with the new policy objectives relating to the creation of sufficient, appropriate, and attainable housing. An open house was held on May 16th, and a public meeting was held on June 19th, 2024, where the public was given an opportunity to provide comments in accordance with the Planning Act. Council gave first reading to the associated new zoning bylaw CS-40 on the same date. Additional public engagement was offered in the form of a series of pop-up consultation sessions, and those were held at the Credit Union Place between June 20th and July 3rd. And information was posted on the city's website. Letters were also sent to property owners adjacent to the proposed new CDA in accordance with the requirements of bylaw SS-15. The proposed plan amendments also address the east-west connector, repealing the 2008 secondary plan, providing policy guidance for a new category of comprehensive development area, CDA, and amending the future land use map to designate the connector as CDA. Report, Section 5.7 of the zoning bylaw and Part 3 of the Planning Act set out requirements and procedures for amending and adopting official plans. The process outlined in the background above and in the attached planning board report explain in detail the nature of the changes. And for zoning bylaw CS-40, the background, a series of strategic amendments were prepared to bring the existing zoning bylaw in line with the new policy objectives relating to the creation of sufficient, appropriate, and attainable housing. Given the scope of changes, a new bylaw, zoning bylaw CS-40, was prepared to replace the existing zoning bylaw SS-15. A public meeting was held on June 19th, 2024, and council gave first reading to the associated new zoning bylaw CS-40 on the same date. Additional public engagement was offered in the form of an open house on May 16th. A series of pop-up consultation sessions were held at Credit Union Place between June 20th and July 3rd, and information was posted on the city's website. Letters were also sent to property owners adjacent to the proposed new CDA in accordance with the requirements of bylaw SS-15. The proposed new zoning bylaw CS-40 adds provisions to support the supply of housing, adds the east-west connector as a new category of comprehensive development area with 3 sub-districts, addresses a number of other HAF priorities such as accessory dwelling units, additional housing near post-secondary institutions, modular housing, terminology updates, and amends the zoning map to designate the connector as CDA. A full list of changes are outlined in the accompanying summary tables. Report, Section 5.7 of the zoning bylaw and Part 3 of the Planning Act set out requirements and procedures for amending and adopting planning bylaws. A, conformity with all requirements of this bylaw. Staff comment, the process of review meets the requirements of the zoning bylaw. B, conformity with the official plan. Staff comment, the process of review meets the requirements of the official plan with the associated official plan amendments in OP 39. C, suitability of the site for the proposed development. Staff comment, not applicable, as the proposed changes are not site-specific. D, compatibility of the proposed development with surrounding land uses, including both existing and projected uses. Staff comment, not applicable. Once again, the proposed changes are not site-specific. E, any comments from residents or other interested persons. Staff comment, public comments from the June 19th meeting are included in the minutes of that meeting. Public comments outside of verbal submissions at that meeting have been collected and reviewed and are attached as a schedule. F, adequacy of existing water, sewer, road, stormwater, and electrical services, city parking, and parklands for accommodating the development and any projected infrastructure requirements. Staff comment, not applicable as proposed changes are not site-specific. G, impacts from the development on pedestrian or vehicular access and safety and on public safety generally. Staff comment, proposed changes are not site-specific. Proposed changes will facilitate development in a new CDA zone to regulate orderly development along the newly constructed east-west corridor. H, compatibility of the development with environmental, scenic, and heritage resources. Staff comment, proposed changes are not site-specific. Proposed changes will facilitate orderly development. I, impacts on city finances and budgets. Staff comment, the City of Summerside signed a contribution agreement with the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, on December 7th, 2023. The city committed to 14 initiatives to increase housing density and to streamline review and approvals in keeping with HAF project goals, including updating the official plan and zoning bylaw to promote greater housing density. The city will receive up to $5.8 million in funding. In the long term, the proposed changes are expected to support sustainable growth in the city, including efficient and cost-effective use of infrastructure, population retention, and an increased housing supply. And please hold. J, other matters as specified in this bylaw, staff comment, not applicable. And K, other matters as considered relevant, staff comment, not applicable. Staff recommendation. City staff supports the proposed amendments to the city's official plan and new zoning bylaw CS-40. and recommends that both be referred to council for approval. As per section 5.10, part B3 of the zoning bylaw, the planning board shall make a recommendation to council on amendments and new planning documents before they are approved or denied. The planning board recommendation, whether carried or defeated, will be brought forward for council for a final decision. And the proposed planning board recommendation, the proposed amendments to the city's official plan as articulated in official plan amendment OP 39, and which includes the repeal of the 2008 East-West Connector secondary plan, and zoning bylaw CS-40, which includes the repeal of zoning bylaw SS-15, be recommended to be approved by council. As planning board chair, I will move that we move this to the monthly council meeting a week from tonight, and I would ask for a seconder from planning board. Councillor Morrison. All members of planning board in favor of, and I always kind of stumble. Like, yeah, okay, we'll put it on the floor first, yeah. I just wanted to make sure that we're not indicating, you know, full support at this point, but we need to move it to council, and council will make a decision as a whole at that time, so. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Duran. So at this time, we have the recommendation on the subject of official plan amendment OP 39 and new zoning bylaw CS-40, Housing Accelerator Fund HAF initiatives, is on the floor and open for discussion. And I think we'll open it first for members of planning board, again, members of the public. Well, we're all up here. We have a planning board is Councilors Morrison, Snow, Duran, and myself. But as has been our practice since day one, all of council sits in planning board meetings and participates. But I'd open the floor first to any member of planning board, and then we'll open it to council for comments and questions to Sam or to staff or to anybody else.
Okay.
Councilor Duran?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would have a question, I guess really for anyone that has the the knowledge. And it's a question that has to do really with 99% of the emails that we get. People seem to be concerned with their property values. So I don't know if anyone kind of has I know, Rick, you kind of have a real estate background. So I mean, like if I was to say, hypothetically, I'll just use my own house as an example. If my neighbor to the left decided that they wanted to put up a 4-unit apartment, and the neighbor to the right wanted to do the same, would that decrease my property value? And I don't know the answer. I truly want to know kind of what the conception is, or like, is there truth to that? Or, because in my head, I feel like it would increase because the neighborhood value would be higher. And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I mean, anybody like planning, with planning knowledge, like does that, or is it too much of a blanket?
I suspect this may be, well, I'll give you the answer from staff's perspective. No, there's, I mean, this issue's been studied worldwide. There's no evidence that these type of changes would actually decrease property values. That's actually the opposite's the case. Growing communities that are well planned and well thought out, property values tend to continue to increase. So it's certainly a common fear that people have, but the issue has been, again, it's been studied worldwide, studied throughout North America and certainly in Canada, and there's no empirical evidence that these types of changes decrease property values. And in fact, the reality is the opposite. They increase property values over time with good planning, good communities that are have strong official plans and allow for growth in appropriate ways.
Okay, so is there any indication of what that fear is? Is it a fear of unkeptness? Like, what is it that, and maybe you don't know, or nobody knows, I'm just, and it's been, like I say, 9 out of 10 emails or conversations, the concern is decreased property value. So I just wanted to explore why that is, or how that is.
I think one other point that is interesting, I don't know if it's relevant to this conversation or not, but that is interesting, is that we've had unprecedented growth in the community and the island in general over the last number of years. And through this time, even without likely great planning on a land use perspective in the beforehand, even without that, we've seen property values increase drastically over the last 5-6 years. So with good and appropriate planning, that should continue.
Okay. I do have one more question. Rick, I saw you're like, come on, did you want to add anything to that part, or?
It's not really going to answer the question, but it's just a little story that I have. I'll bore everybody with it for a minute. I'm probably a third or fourth generation person that was fortunate enough to sit at this table. So from the time I was probably 14, 15 years old up till now, I've had many family conversations, both from my grandfather and father, and when Summerside was much smaller, and every time it expanded or grew, that was a comment that was made. It was a little, it wasn't quite as common probably back in the 60s or the 70s, but certainly now in the last 20 years, you hear it constantly about my property values. And I can only say that I think Summerside's better off today with the expansion. You know, at one point in time, not that long ago, everything north of Queen Elizabeth Park, I shouldn't say everything, but majority of that was a farm. You know, McCune Road from the rails, where the railroad track was, to what was then Timber Trail Park, was a dirt road. You know, so we've grown quite a bit. And I don't think in all that time that someone could take me into a place and show me because something that was built next door or further, you know, or in the area has decreased their property value. And maybe they can, but I've been in a lot of yards in Summerside and through properties, and I don't see where that's ever happened. And that's just a thought. You know,
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Thanks. No, I just want to try to get some answers for folks. My only other question at this time, and we've visited it numerous times, but if we could define, because when people think of the word apartment, I think my mind goes to big brick cube, ugly building, where an apartment actually refers to the use of the building. So can we maybe, Sam or Janice or Linda or Aaron or Thane, if we could just, again, like I say, we've done it before, just can we define the word apartment?
So your bylaw defines an apartment building as a building containing more than 2 dwelling units, except a row house and townhouse as defined in the bylaw. So it's a very broad encompassing term.
Yeah.
It could be anything other than those sort of side-by-side units.
But it doesn't refer to the look.
It
of
is
an
not about
apartment.
the look,
just-
it's about the number of units and the way they are assembled.
Yeah, so any house could, by definition, be an apartment, depending on how many units are within that house. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have a few questions, maybe a couple comments, and then we'll go from there, but, can you further explain the design standards, guidelines, and that sort of stuff, and how that works? So, again, I think a lot of people have a lot of fears. Anytime we do any rezoning throughout the city, we get usually a crowd that comes. Sometimes it's more than this, sometimes it's less, but their concerns, to the point made earlier, they're very similar to, increased traffic, my property values are going down. That is always a concern that comes forward loud and clear. But through that report, when you guys were presenting, you'd mentioned having design standards. Can you give a quick overview? Because I know they're not totally determined yet, but how that will ultimately play to the future development.
Okay. Thank you. So if you'll recall, in July, there was quite a lot of discussion about the timing and making the changes ahead of having any design standard work completed. When the city's application was put forward, certain time frames had to be set out in order to put together that application, and very clear deadlines had to be put on different aspects of the work. And the initial focus of the work was to get everything in place to enable, to meet especially those 4 criteria that the CMHC had put in place. The design standards or guidelines discussion is next in the queue of work. It's obviously been held up a bit at this point, but there was concerns that there wasn't enough to protect in the interim from whatever those impacts might be. As we discussed in July, we don't know what those design standards will be at the end of the day. We haven't had that conversation with council. We haven't had that conversation with the community, whether it's mandatory designs, whether it's pre-approved plans, or whether it's just guidelines that people are asked to meet. In the interim, the additional language is definitely subject to interpretation, but it will allow the development officers, the folks who are approving applications, to look at whether the proposed building is in keeping with the height. If it's, you still have those height limits that would be in place for any other residential building that's already in the bylaw, but the massing. So we aren't, through the agreement and the commitments that the city has made, they can't be standards that would prohibit those 4 units, but it would allow the city to look at what the look and feel will be and how it'll fit into the neighborhood. So whether the design is compatible, not whether the use is compatible. So it's an interim wording until the next bit of work happens.
So, we're keeping a close eye on where this conversation is going across Canada, and some of the sample designs that we're seeing also include things like porches and side entrances and just features on a 4-unit building to make it look maybe more like a house, and to maybe move away from a tall, straight wall and break up the roof lines. So we're not there yet, but we need enabling language in order to go forward. And the official plan, and the official plan especially, gives us enabling language so that we can set the direction going forward. And we're keeping a close eye on what's being developed in other parts of Canada. Summerside is early, one of the earlier agreements to be signed. So, and we're certainly looking at what the architectural, what do the houses look like in Summerside already, and what could they look like? But we this is the first step.
So in short, it's to make sure that any of those 4-unit dwellings or buildings being built in a current residential type area, that it would meet the feel of the neighborhood, basically, in some way, shape, or form. That's the intent of that wording?
Yes.
Okay. And that's how I understood it. I just, to Councilor Duran's point, I think when people start talking about apartments, they think of a big apartment building. And they think of how it maybe does not fit with their existing house or the issues that might come with it. Although, just because it's an apartment building doesn't mean you're going to get any more housing issues than you would in a single residential. I can point to residential houses throughout the city and everybody's ward, and existing issues that we as councillors are trying to deal with on a daily basis that keeps us up at night and keeps the neighbors up. So because you live in a residential home, please don't feel like you're somewhat protected, because I can guarantee you're not, based on experience and what I've been dealing with the last little bit. So I also, and I think it's our job as council to not correct, maybe correct, but to get the information or try to provide the information to the public when they come forward with concerns. I have a habit when we're doing these types of things, I watch the gallery, I look at people, and there's a couple things I've noticed. So as we talked about having public engagement, people's eyes were like, oh, I didn't know nothing about it when that happened. There's a lot of that. I can tell you 100% sure, this is my second term on council. I've always been sort of a council buff before I even got on council. I followed along and always tried to pay attention. I can tell you this process has been very public and very engaging on purpose. But one of the issues that I had when I joined council and continue to have is I don't think we do a good enough job, or I don't think that's the right wording. I don't think we can do a good enough job to engage people. I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know how we get the information out to people, but I think we need to try to continue to do that. But I can tell you, as a city and as one councillor, and I can't say for all the councillors, but I assume they have been trying to engage with you. And leading up to the next vote, I would encourage anybody, especially if you bake good cookies and stuff, to give me a shout, and I would be more than happy to come and meet and sit down, and I'm sure every councillor would do that to try to get you the answers to some of the concerns you have. Because I can tell you, when I look around, I have an idea of where some of you live. Nobody's coming in to tear down a house beside you to build an apartment building. If it is, that house has been a pain in your side for a long time if that house is being torn down. So alleviate some of those concerns. If there's a piece of property that is maybe not developed yet, yeah, there's some possibilities there, but it's still quite restrictive. So I just, as a young father with a son in university, daughter coming up through, I think we do need to start looking outside the box. And please don't get mad at me, but when I look around here, I don't see anybody that is in a housing crisis right now that really needs. I assume everybody in here all look very capable. You're in probably a very secure housing situation, and that's not the case for everybody in Summerside. So I just caution everybody, because you do get the fear. I understand that. I would do the exact same thing for my neighborhood. Everybody's doing what's best for themselves at this moment. I understand that. You got to do that. But let's just make sure we reach out, ask the questions. Anything you're concerned with, reach out to your councillor, reach out to me if I'm not your councillor, or whoever, the city staff, and we'll get you the answers to what you need. Because I do know there's been a lot of work put into this, and I apologize if you feel that you haven't been engaged enough. So I do want to commend you guys for the work and effort you guys put into it, because it has been a lot of effort, and all of my fellow councillors that put all the time and effort into everything to this point. But I think I have another chance to ask some questions later, so I'll let the other planning board and council talk.
Yeah, just one question, I think. Would you people be aware of how many communities across Canada have applied for this?
There is a list. I think city was number 17. I think the mayor had noted at one point. Janice will look up the list. This is communities, municipalities, regions across the country are part of this HALF program and funding. And a large number, I don't know how many didn't have these requirements as part of their funding agreement, but I would say that the conditions you have on your agreement are fairly identical to those, especially of the larger, the cities and the larger communities.
So I guess, yes, I was looking for two things, and probably just curiosity is to how many municipalities would be involved. And out of all those municipalities, I assume that most of them have to do the same thing that we're doing as far as, yeah.
Yes, and we've seen the letters that went to the various cities. It was almost identical in many cases. I am aware of some where they didn't have those requirements, but they were, the ones I'm aware of, they were smaller places.
Rural communities, so 27 cities. I have a list of 27 cities, just going Fredericton, New Brunswick, Richmond, BC, Milton, Ontario, Ajax, Kingston, Ontario, St. Catharines, Burlington, Guelph, Surrey, BC, Summerside, Iqaluit, Toronto, Winnipeg, Burnaby, Mississauga, Vancouver, Richmond Hill, Moncton, Calgary, Quebec, Kitchener, Kelowna, Brampton, Halifax, Hamilton, Vaughan, and London.
Okay. And I assume there'll be more to follow.
So a second round of funding has opened up again?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, there will be more to follow, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And I just wanted to make the comment once again to the WE6 planning group, and especially Janice and Sam for all your work, and also to all of council, because it's a lot of work for you guys, less for us, but we've certainly spent some time on it and looking things over. And again, it's the same thing. Everybody in this room wouldn't be here if they didn't care about the city of Summerside. And we just want what's best and what's right, and to try to make everything work. So, you know, we're looking at a package like this, and some of the people that are in the gallery that are here got a one-page flyer with one sentence on it, that, you know, it's just a small part of what we're doing. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that I love everything about this, but I certainly like the package. And sometimes you gotta take a little bit of bad with all the good. So, thank you for your effort and all the information and your hard work.
I'll move to Councillor Drawn, but I do want to just respond to Rick's question there, and Janice and Sam. There is a running tracker here, so the list is 93 municipalities across Canada, and then all municipalities in the province of British Columbia, over 5,000 people now have been provincially mandated to require, in this case, 4 units as of right. Yeah, Councillor Drawn.
Yeah, just a question, I guess, to build on Rick's reference to the flyer and the you know, the misconceptions, the misinformation that's going out there. I wonder if there's a misconception that we're trying to fast track a lot of this simply in order to get free money. You know, Janice, you mentioned earlier, just right off the get-go in your presentation, that these issues that we're trying to battle are going to happen anyway, which is why, you know, why not get some funding to help? I wonder if you can just briefly address that misconception that, we're just doing this because we need the money, like just a high-level summary of the actual fund? Or is that too much of a loaded?
Well,
I'm just really trying to make people aware of.
I'll start with
why
the
we're here.
context, if that helps.
Yes, yeah.
The city had a housing assessment done in 2021, I believe is the date on that, and it was noted at that time that there would be a significant amount of housing needed and an increase in the number of units that were approved on an annual basis to meet the projected population. If you go even one more or two. So an increase to up to, you know, between 190, 220 maybe units a year would have to be approved to meet the projected population in Summerside by 2030, I believe, was the time horizon on that one. And so it was identified 2031 that there was already a recognition that the city did not have the housing, and it's not just Summerside, obviously. We've been hearing about it across the province and across the country, that not anticipating and planning for the different types of housing that different family groups, household groups, whoever needs is creating some of the situation we're in. So that the city had already started that work. The task force last year that involved community members from different sectors, from the community, from different industries, also identified and took that one step further and looked at a lot of the steps that would have to take place, and these aren't unique to Summerside. The solutions are from being identified across the country. There's always slight variations, but from our perspective, the funding was almost fortuitous that it came when the city and other municipalities had identified the work that had to happen. The funding came, and the initiatives that were identified as part of it by the CMHC as part of the programming matched what municipalities knew they had to do. And it was helping them do that work. I don't know, Janice, if you want to speak to the actual application.
So the application was actually a really interesting process because we had to look at what was unique to Summerside and what the application involved, like kind of looking at the short term, 3 years, but also projecting for 10 years what was needed. And after the application was submitted, so the application has a projection in place for a number of housing units needed for the next 3 years. But then with these changes over the next 10 years, there will be let's say, an exponential, exponential growth in housing, and it so it's about setting the stage for growth and development. And in speaking to staff after the application, planning staff after the application was submitted, staff pointed out the old official plan and the existing bylaw were written for another era. They were written for an era that saw decreasing growth and stagnant growth. And now now the situation is more housing is needed, and how do we direct that housing to where it can be supported over time? And that's partly what we're looking at here. And one of the challenges is, the official plan and the bylaw are really technical documents, and we're drilling down through layers of, a technical approach, and people want a soundbite. And I would like to give you a soundbite as to make it all simple, but essentially, the housing need was identified, and it was identified through the Mayor's Housing Task Force, as well as the housing needs assessment that was done prior to the application, prior to funding. When the funding became available, there was an application process, and Summerside was fit very well because it had up-to-date documents that showed there was a need, there is a need. And then the application went through fairly quickly because it focused on planning tools. And we're planners, so we focused on planning tools and what could be used to help the city find ways to develop a range of housing. I've been a planner on PEI, as Sam has been, for over 20 years. When we started working here, I'll speak for myself, single unit homes were what was built, and apartments were few and far between, and row houses or townhouses were unheard of. So the only option people had was to live in or buy a single unit dwelling. And now, 20 years later, we're seeing that not everybody wants a single unit dwelling. Not everybody can afford a single unit dwelling. So in a 20-year period, we've gone from one size fits all to a recognition that there are a lot of options out there, but we don't necessarily make those options accessible to developers or to residents. So we're kind of seeing a huge shift in approach. But if we stick with the old approach, it's not going to be very easy to be nimble and to direct housing to where it can serve the needs, the varied needs of the population.
That was a fantastic explanation. My final, question. So the city committed to 14 initiatives to increase the housing density and streamline review and approvals. City will receive up to $5.8 million. I think the question that a lot of people are asking, what is the city going to spend that on? Obviously, the city is not building homes. Can we answer the question, what is the city using the $5.8 million for? And I think I know the answer. I'm just trying to ask questions on behalf of everyone.
So some of the money is earmarked to go directly to property owners. The next round of initiatives that are coming up, let's see, where are they? Towards the end here, sorry. So much information. Initiatives. They're incentive programs. So there will be direct financial incentives for those who would develop accessory dwelling units. I think that's $5,000 per unit. It hasn't been determined. Okay. So I'm jumping the gun because other communities are offering to the tune of $5,000 per accessory dwelling unit. So that would help to defray the costs of developing a unit. So this will go to the property owner. Similarly, there will be financial incentives for redeveloping properties. Again, the details haven't been looked at because we're not there yet, but there is money available for property owners to assemble properties, incentivize multi-unit modular. I think that's just between four units.
Yeah, and some of those are more focused on the downtown and revitalizing some of those areas where you could have the higher density as well. So there's a range there.
Okay, no, that's fantastic. Just
Councillor John, perhaps CAO or Director of Finance can speak to any, I don't want to say strings attached, but any parameters with respect to half funding, because as I understand, some of it can be used for infrastructure, east-west connector, general revenue for things like, do you want to speak to general?
Go on.
I was going to say, the things that we need as a municipality in order to be able to sustain
Right.
the development of future housing. So whether that is sidewalks, roads, parks, green spaces, fire halls, electrical transmission lines, pipes, sewers, all the things that you need to make sure that you need, that a house can actually work, whether it's 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 units, 4 units, or more. There are some some of that money is allocated for incentives, which means some of that money will go directly to residents. But overall, that money would go to the things that we need in order to sustain our community and provide the infrastructure.
I just wanted to be clear that the city is not creating supply, or we're not building apartments, you know, I wanted to make sure everyone knows that. Okay.
I don't have any specific questions. I have some summary comments, which I guess I'll provide at the end. So we'll open the floor to other members of council with questions. Councillor McGowan?
Okay, and did you have some, Karen? Okay. I think the discussion has been helpful from Sam and, I keep forgetting your name. Thank you. It's been really helpful to explain. I think some of the comments from councillors has been really important to hear. I think for me, where I'm really trying to figure out some answers and to the questions that I've had from residents is, I think what you folks are presenting is very importantly scripted. You know the information, there's a lot of information. I think it's really hard for people to absorb that, especially in one evening or 2 evenings, because I'm finding it really hard to absorb it all. I think with the questions, that the biggest thing that I have heard from people is when you listed the different towns or cities or whatever throughout Canada that are involved with the Housing Accelerator Fund, I'm just wondering to myself, how many of those communities would be around the same population base that we have? Yes, we want to grow, but I'm thinking in terms of the questions that I've been asked from people around infrastructure. I think if, we're looking at housing, but yet again, if we need or we don't have the full complement of resources and infrastructure that we need now, and we're moving into a mode where we are growing, I think there are concerns there. And I know a few of my fellow councillors have mentioned the word fear tonight. I don't see it as fear. I see it more as people want to know about the homework and the study and the planning and all of that kind of information that we're doing, so that they can have a confidence in knowing that those things are being thought about. So when I think of the hospital, when I think of schools, when I think of affordable, attainable housing, some people may have an idea that, it's going to be something that's affordable for a lot of people. But if we are in the market of building through a fund and we have very high-end apartments, can people afford them? So we're going to be in a situation where people will be very upset if they are not able to, if it's a young couple starting out, if it's, people that are starting a first-time job. Those are the things that I think people have concerns about. They're not afraid. They just want to know, are those things being looked at in the planning? Another thing I think with people that I've heard from in telephone calls is it's not a case of being concerned so much about unkept properties, but I think people are very concerned because what is the most important investment that we make is our home. And so people have invested a lot of savings and time and effort into their homes. And I think people that have bought into neighborhoods where that's supposed to be there, and they bought into it before these changes were being considered, I think that's creating a bit of apprehension. They want to know. And a lot of times with real estate companies, that may not be on the radar the way that it is now. So we're having to deal with those kinds of questions, which we can't. And as Councillor Rick pointed out, we have a very large packet here tonight. We're not professionals. And the other thing that I want to point out is every one of us in this room are different kinds of learners. We receive in different ways, and I need to hear things broken down and explained so that I really get the picture, because I'm a visual learner. I can't take a lot of verbiage and figure it all out. So I think those are some of the things that I've heard in questions. And my final point from people that have called that have not sent in emails, their concern is, yes, we've been very proud to list off the presentations and the public presentations and those kinds of things, and we've really tried our best. But bottom line, I think, is when people do not feel like they're being heard or listened to, or we don't get that dialogue back and forth, then I think we miss something in the exchange. And so I don't know how we get that so that we can hear from people. Because I know when I make my decision, I'm basing it on what I hear from the residents, not only besides the study and all of the formal piece of it, because as I've said many times, it's the people that put their trust in us, and we're their advocates. So if we don't know, and we can't get the answers, or we can't hear from all of the residents, that's a big concern. And I know you've done a lot of work, and you're not supposed to clap, we've been told that, so don't. But please, I just think it's really important that we do our homework and we get those pieces of information, because I'm trying to read, and I know my fellow councillors are, but you've done a lot of very important work. But again, I still feel it's like an itch that's not being scratched. We're not hearing directly from the people. And sometimes I think what happens is people think, well, it's up to the residents to be informed. It's up to the residents to come, whatever. But if they don't know, or if they have to sit and take a lot of words and verbiage, but they have to sit there and be good little children and not ask a question, then we're not hearing what we need to hear, how they're feeling. So I just put that out there as one council person.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow up on what you just said, Norma, and Corey had mentioned explaining things to people and getting people out there. That little mail out or that little handout that somebody did that worked. It got people asking questions. So I think as a city, doing a mail out is a very simple thing, and I don't see that as something that's an issue that we can't do moving forward. Not everybody has Facebook. Not everybody can manipulate the internet and get around and figure out when and where things are happening and looking at maps and so on. So a good old-fashioned handout, I'm sorry, but that's sometimes the way that we have to go. And especially now, like you said, we have different groups that are moving in. We're becoming more diverse. Like if they get this, then they'll ask somebody a handout, they'll ask somebody else what it is, so it starts the conversation. So I myself am requesting that we have to do more of whoever initiated that handout, because we can learn. Was it Lee? Did you point to
so.
Lee? Was it you?
No.
I thought you pointed to Lee. We have to do more of that. It's simple. It's getting people engaged, and if that's the old-fashioned way of doing it, well, that's what we have to do. So, because it doesn't matter how many times I share something on Facebook or you know, I'm horrible with Instagram and every other form of social media, so Facebook's my go-to. So I don't know what else we can do other than that, and our paper's only like once a week, and, you know, we don't always get the media time that we need for important things, for good news stories. So on behalf of my residents, I'm requesting that we do more of this type of thing. So Corey, you had mentioned like explaining things to people, but it's hard when things like design concepts are not yet decided. Myself, unless, like you had mentioned also, Norma, unless you can see what we're dealing with, it's hard for me to agree that, okay, let's go and let's take a chance that it's going to be all right. Because, as you stated, somebody will be reviewing and deciding the compatibility. Well, who decides the compatibility of the design of something in an area?
So it'll rest with whoever has the authority. So if it's the development officer, if it's a permitted use, it would be staff. If it's a discretionary use, it would be council.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to build a fourplex, I use the fourplex instead of an apartment because I know, like Justin said, everybody's mind goes to big when you say apartment. So if somebody wanted to build a fourplex beside, that's currently like just a lot for a house, who does that design would come to the city, and then staff would decide on if it's appropriate for the area. Would there be consultation with the people that live in the area, or would it just be on, okay, this is?
Not as written, no. And that gets back to our discussion in July that we haven't had that discussion about how prescriptive the city wants to get. And are you dictating to people the shape of their porch and the number of hedges in front? And you might want to go that route, but I don't think that decision's been made yet. And so no, at this point, it will be a judgment call on the part of whoever has the authority to approve that application.
Okay. And Corey, you had brought up design standards too, so I was just sort of looking for like an explanation on that part, the individuals that would be involved in deciding that. So the transition area that you had talked about, like is in Bluebell, that 3 that bumps up against Walker Collin, maybe? I'm sorry. Yeah. So that changed after consultation and after residents expressed concern about like it was R1 and like then boom, it was changing. What other areas of the city is that going to be present in all current areas? So is Lafergie, is Woodridge, is Meadow Heights, is Starlight, are those current places going to be afforded the same that those were?
So the concerns that had been raised in June and July were about the 10 stories, and even if it's, the step back after the 4th story, that sense of height difference between existing neighborhoods was really about the expanded height in the CDA, and that hasn't been put in place anywhere else in the city. So these were specific changes to address some of the comments that were received about the CDA. The 10 stories doesn't apply in other parts of the city, so we haven't had the same discussion.
Okay. I guess I don't really understand. So let's just say my backyard. If somebody wants to build in my backyard and they want to put up a 10-story building, there's currently nothing there, say,
They wouldn't be able, depending on what the zoning is, there's only a few zones, and I think it's the downtown zone that allows that height.
Okay, so on the outskirts of town,
Yep.
that's nothing that's going to be,
The height has changed in the R4, I
Right.
think, up to 6 stories, and in the new CDA. And that's the only place, I believe, where we've changed the height at all, so it wouldn't affect the other zones.
Okay.
Unless, again, sorry, that 4 stories around Holland College, but most of that area would be permitted up to 3 stories right now already.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, give us an example.
Give us an example. So if you live in an R1 zone,
Yep.
the maximum building height in
Yep.
any R1 zone is 35 feet, 3 stories.
Okay,
That hasn't changed
okay.
at all.
That's always been that?
Always, no change. There's no change to height. And
Okay.
if someone wants to put in a 4-unit apartment building or an accessory unit, that height is the same. So it's 2.5 stories, 3 stories, 35 feet.
Okay.
Right, yeah, 35, yeah, 10.5 meters or 34.4 feet. So there's no change to the maximum building height in
Okay.
R1, R2, and R3R zones. No change to height,
No change to height.
no change.
Okay, that's good to know. And
Sorry, the
it's
R3
good to use examples because
The R-
it just makes your mind,
And it's the R3 as well. So the R4 is the only place, other than the CDA, where the height has changed.
right, okay. So I guess, like, everybody read the letters that, you know, and that's what's been in the letters has been addressed already, like, you know, and it's like, yeah, like you said, fear is not a good word, but just the unknown is an issue. I agree, it's an issue. And I want to give some examples, like, there's concern over if the person who's deciding if it's going to be acceptable is thinking of it as if it was personally theirs. If the person that's deciding is just looking at it as, oh yeah, that looks good, it's acceptable within this box, there's more than within this box to think about, right? Like there's the community, there's the neighborhood. I worry that not consulting with somebody in the area that it's going to happen, I don't think I see that as an issue.
So, I think what I'm hearing is that there's subjectivity and there's objectivity. And what's the difference between what Samantha considers to be pretty and
Yeah.
what's the difference between
Yep.
what Janice considers to be pretty? And what's the difference between what Mayor Dan considers to be pretty? So in order for staff to make a decision, they will have to develop some kind of internal policy. And after the meeting in July, we very briefly talked about, do you want to look at window sizes, siding types, front step materials? Like, do you want to be prescriptive and really get into a whole lot of details about how big your windows are going to be? Or do you want to look at maybe some initial wording about scale, like setbacks? Because if 2 buildings are, let's say, 20 feet back from the public right-of-way, and someone wants to submits an application with a 10-foot setback, if that's permitted, then that may be a big difference. And some bylaws even have rules and regulations about averaging out setbacks along the street. So that seemed to be something that might be of interest, and scale, as in the mass of a building. So that seemed to be of interest. So those were general terms that we enabled or set about creating enabling language in the official plan of the bylaw. But at this point in time, we didn't feel like we had enough direction to start looking at something like siding material, roof slope, window size, front step materials. You know, so there's the objective, general, and then there's the prescriptive, very specific.
Yep.
But staff will need to develop some kind of internal guiding document in the short term, and it's up to staff to decide, or it's up to council to decide what direction to get to staff. But what we're doing at this point in time is we're trying to give enabling wording in the official plan, which is guiding, and then clarity to process, with regards to process in the bylaw, what's permitted, what's not permitted, without getting into too many details, because we don't have direction from council yet.
Yeah.
So-
Because if we're doing this, and part of it has been mentioned, it's like, you know, to be more inclusive of, you know, like what the needs of different people, what they need to be able to live in, what they can afford, and what they need. I think it's only fair that we also include the people that are currently living in it to make that community, like it's a neighborhood, it's a community. So yes, we want to be able to give people what they need, but we also have to include the people that are currently there who want to welcome these people, and new residents into the city, but we also have to make it work for the people that are currently there. So that's where I have a little bit of a, that has to be worked on. Like I have a real speed bump with that part of it, remembering who's currently in place in these communities. Look, so, and for example, I had a call from somebody and he said, I just find it so hard to believe that somebody can come and put what's proposed in my backyard, but yet I'm told that I can't add on to my accessory building because it's already maxed out. So people are having a hard time getting around. They can't make changes with what they have, but yet we're saying you should want, or you should be adaptable to new coming in whenever they want to do new in their current, and they feel like they can add on to their accessory building and it will be perfectly fine within their fenced yard and in their house and so on. But he's like, why can't I do that, but yet the yard behind me can do
And
something bigger?
You raise a great point there, and I think the city has already acknowledged that a full review of the plan and bylaw is through this process and on parallel work.
Yep.
That, you know, it's time for some of that as well. As Janice said, our expectations for our communities are changing and our needs are changing. So we had very specific mandate when we were doing this work for the city and in participation with the staff, but we know that there's a whole list of other things that possibly aren't working, and so those are great points to keep track of, right?
Yeah.
There might be other things that also need to be changed in the bylaw.
Yeah, and fixing what might be sort of not working at times is very important before we we don't want to add fire to or fuel to the fire, for lack of a better term. So I guess I wanted also an explanation of, you said one area went from 8 down to 6. What was that referencing?
So in the R3, what was presented in, I don't know if you can pull up, no, we don't need the map, we need the table for the zone.
In R3.
No, one more, yeah. So what we had proposed in June and July was that it would go to eight units for row houses and townhouses.
Okay.
And those are currently discretionary uses, so they would go to council for approval. And so in order to find a little bit of balance, there was a decision to propose to go to 6 as permitted. And then those extra 2 units would go back to council as discretionary. So it's just in the R3 zone, and it's, again, just trying to find a little bit of balance.
So that would be land already zoned R3, or would have to come to council to get rezoned R3.
Right.
So it wouldn't be in an existing R1.
Correct.
So-
Okay. Perfect, thank you. That's good. Okay, and I guess, yeah, I don't know. And I know that, I guess the ward I represent, and I've said this to Dan before, I feel that we have incredible development in the ward that we live in. And I'm gonna speak for my residents and myself. You know, Woodridge, the corridor that's opening, Starlight, Kembers, Camerons, Arsenaults, 27 acres that anybody can buy any day and develop. We have been, and I've said this to Mayor Dan before, the residents in the ward I represent have been very, very accepting of development in our area. Like, it's been very, I've said this before, like, I'm very proud of how accepting everybody has been. Everybody, you know, there's questions now and then. The developers have been good to sit and work with people, and I don't want that to change. I don't want the communication that we've worked hard on and being able to pick up the phone or knock on the door, the developer go and talk to somebody because they don't know what's coming up next to them. Like, that has to continue. I think it's very, very important that this is not, I don't want this pushed on anybody. Yeah, like, anyways, you know, like, I mean, all our releases are about the traffic and coming in and out of town. Well, that's us. So I think we've done our fair share of accepting the growth and the pains that have come with it, and we are also getting to benefit from that growth in our area. So I don't want the concerns that are being brought forward not to be taken seriously. Like, if these people are taking the time, and I said it never fails, every time I go on vacation something happens, because every time, and it's so important. And the Facebook messages, the texts, the calls, the emails, if they're taking the time to do it, and that means they care, so we have to give that back. That's all I have.
Councilor McDougall?
Thank you, Worship. That's the longest you've ever kept me quiet since for a bit. I want to thank Sam and Janice for the work that they've done, but I've really been struggling with this one. I read all the emails, I've received some emails. I've got a lot of phone calls, and on the boardwalk, I've been doing more talking than I've been doing walking lately. And it's all to do with the 4-unit as of right. It's been working on me for a while. I even had a conversation with Samantha this morning that I thank her for that. And we talked about the notification, and the reason these people are in this room is because they got a little note in their mailbox. Everybody's got a mailbox. We need to use that. If the people are not here and things, and the reason they're here tonight is because of fear of what is going to happen, and it's, you know, maybe some of them should have been here earlier. Well, they probably would have if they'd have known what was going on. I've had phone calls and people say, I asked to show up tonight. No, you're going to do whatever you want anyway. So, and it's all about money, and that's you know, not right. We're not doing whatever we want. We all have a voice around the table, but I do have concerns around the 4-unit. I sat on the Premier's Task Force for Housing. I sat on the Mayor's Task Force for Housing, and when the Housing Accelerator Fund was announced, I was in Ottawa, and Minister Fraser was talking about it, and I was very excited about this because when we talked about it at first, I was taking the 4-unit as a right to be, what we were talking about is allowing people to, you know, have secondary suites, have a granny suite in the backyard. That's basically happening now. And so that's what I was looking at in the subdivisions where I represent. You know what, I think we could live with that. But the 4-unit as of right, I think there's a big fear there. But the question I have around it is the federal government through CMHC is wanting to increase housing as fast as they can. Well, this 4-unit as of right in a lot of Summerside is probably not going to affect anybody in the next number of years. So I'm not sure why there is such a, this is non-negotiable, you know, this 4-unit as of right, because we're not going to be tearing houses down to build 4 units unless, you know, a house burns down or it's dilapidated and somebody tears it down, right? I'm looking for a compromise somehow, and you know, when we made that list there, I think we're the smallest one, and if we're not the smallest, we're probably one of the smallest. And I really am looking for some kind of a compromise, you know, as I said the last time, in the subdivisions, and whether you're in Fairview subdivision, Lafergie subdivision, the lots, those subdivisions were all built back in the 70s and 80s, and they're all larger lots. And, you know, it doesn't seem fair that, you know, my lot, I think, is 85 by 150. And, you know, where in smaller subdivisions, you're not going to get the 4 units, probably because of the smaller lots. But I just, I'm trying to find a way that we can compromise here to, whether it's in the newer subdivisions, allow it to happen in the newer subdivisions. Is there any wiggle room, or is it take it or leave it?
It's take it or leave it. I was involved in a number of other applications,
Yeah,
and those questions were asked directly,
yeah.
and they were answered directly.
Okay, is it take it or leave it for all the money or a portion
All
of
the money. It's
Yeah.
a package deal,
Right,
all the money. Summerside is an urban municipality.
right.
And the rural municipalities may not have water and sewer systems. Summerside has a water and a sewer system. It's a non-negotiable. You've been
Yeah.
working with other municipalities, but it's,
Yeah, and the other part I am fighting with is the design standards. I mentioned it the last time we were here. We've already had something happen in my ward that shouldn't have happened as far as I'm concerned, but then it's still happening. But I don't know how we're going to control that, to have a design standard and who is going to design it, and, you know, that's going to be an issue. I'm just, I don't know, I'm not there yet for this. You know, I know the housing need, and I just think we're putting people in a difficult situation. And the big thing is them not knowing. I wish we would have used the mailbox a lot earlier. Maybe we'd be a lot better off today. But I think there's a lot of people that are not happy with what we're doing. Thank you.
Council Cameron?
Thank you, Your Worship. Want to start out by thanking both of you for the presentation and even further detail into what's in this giant package. And also thank you for the clarification of the 35-ish feet of what is already our standard, so that we all now know that it's not going to be built higher than that. My issue is kind of the same thing that I brought up last time, is I live in a very eclectic neighborhood. I already have all of these things in my neighborhood. My neighborhood is fine. I bought the house there for a reason. It is quiet. It does not bother me. I don't notice the 4-unit apartment that's down the street. I don't notice the low income that's down the street. I don't notice the manor that's across the street from me. It is very quiet at all times. So based off of my opinion of where I live, and this is what I said last time, I find it very hard to understand why anyone would, I hate using the word care, but I can't think of a better word to use, but why anyone would care what is being built in their neighborhood when it already fits in with the size of what is going to be in there. My ask again at this meeting is for anyone, whether it is council, whether it is public, if you can just explain to me why, other than it changes the dynamic of the neighborhood. So you could build a 4-unit beside you and it could change the dynamic of your neighborhood. It could be the best thing that's ever happened to you. Could be the worst thing that's ever happened to you. I need a reason why I need to change how I want to vote on this. Because right now I'm basing it strictly off of what I know, and I don't understand why anyone wants anything differently. So all I'm asking is for anyone to send an email and just explain it to me so that I can better understand and I can represent residents rather than just my opinion. Some of that does come from my opinion, comes from what's in this booklet, the things that you guys have said, but I do need to take into consideration what residents want. The emails that have come through, I understand that you guys don't necessarily all want everything that's in this package, but there's not a lot of information in those emails. It is change of dynamic. It is, I don't think it would look good, which we've already went over that is subjective or objective. It's not something that I can say will look good and you might say it looks good. And traffic, and we live in Summerside and there's really not a crazy amount of traffic to begin with. If someone puts 4 units in, that could be the same thing as someone moving into your house next door and having 4 cars. I just need more information from you guys of why this is so important to you, because I would like to understand more and I'd like to have a vote that's educated based on not just what I know, but what you guys feel and what you guys want. So that is my ask. My email address is on the website. Things have been forwarded, but like I said, there's not a lot of substantial information in those emails. And if you could just elaborate on it, it would really help me going forward to understand how my vote should be formed. And that is it.
Any other further comments, questions from council? I said I would provide sort of my personal summary remarks here. As many of you would know, mayor only votes in the case of a tie. In this case, there are no ties at council as long as everyone is here because we have an odd number of councillors. But when I ran for mayor and when I was elected for mayor, one of the things I committed to do and I'll continue to commit to do is share my opinion on matters, even if there are things that maybe we disagree on. But I said, and I think I said it in the initial debate, that I won't hide behind the excuse that I only vote in the case of a tie. I think you deserve to hear, and I think council deserves to hear as well, what my opinion and my thoughts are, and have those clearly set out. And that's the approach that I've taken throughout my term so far. This, first of all, I made a note here. This is start. There's so much here that is positive. We are talking about a significant revision to our official plan. We're talking about an entirely new zoning bylaw. And we are down into a couple of issues. And that's a positive thing. That means there is a lot of good things that everybody's on the same page for. And I think that's really important to remember. And however this moves forward, taking aside the 2 issues that seem to be the ones gathering the most attention at this point. And I say at this point because the issue that has been getting the biggest attention up to this point in our community has been the lack of attainable housing for so many, way too many of our residents. But right now we're at the point where we're talking about 4 units as of right versus a single unit dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit and potentially a garden suite. That's where we're down into the crunch of public policy making, and this is how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to have dialogue and thoughtful discussion. But when I look at this as an overall, based on the process that we've engaged from the beginning, we're in a good place. This entire package, the package could move through with everything that's here, or maybe we move through with almost everything that's here. Maybe it won't move through at all. But I'm optimistic, and I'm also feeling positive. That may also be because I was away for a couple of weeks, so I came back with all kinds of optimism and energy. The issue, in particular, the issue about the 4 units, is something I have spent a lot of time thinking about, even as the mayor. And really, my job here is to think about how to do my best and to do our best as a council and as a city to make sure our community succeeds, to make sure people are in a better place than they would be if we didn't do what it is that we were doing. And on this issue, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I've spent a lot of time talking to people. I've been directly engaged. I haven't just waited for people to reach out to me. People often reach out when they don't have all of the information, or they're looking for answers, or they have concerns. But I've also spent as much time as possible getting out and speaking to people as well and bringing it up. I don't think anyone in this council is afraid to talk about anything. We've certainly taken a very open and transparent approach to how we go about trying to do what we do. So I could speak about this off the cuff, but I wrote down a few things because I didn't want to miss some of what I think are the important points, and I wanted to share those with you. And I'm not trying to hopefully this doesn't come off as some sort of housing lecture. I've spent so much time on housing and learning about housing and understanding about housing and what is happening, not just in Summerside, but across in each corner of our city, in our community, in our province, in our country. And I had no idea I would ever spend so much time and have so much energy and knowledge and insight into where we are with respect to housing in our communities. But without a doubt, we are in the midst of an acute housing crisis here in Summerside and across BEI. In 2004, which wasn't that long ago, that would be 20 years ago, the average house price, and this isn't the property value, this is what they call the benchmark price, the sale price of a home, was $123,000. That's the average. In 2024, it was $360,000. That's a 200% increase in the price of housing in our community here in Summerside. People's wages have not increased 200% in the last 20 years. And we can dial it back to even sooner. So if we look at the benchmark house price, the sale price in 2014, 10 years ago, was $154,000. Today, as I said, it's $360,000. That is more than double in a period of under 10 years. In a period of just 3 or 4 years, in 2020, the price of housing was $250,000. As I said, today it is $360,000. That is 4 years. The house average price for a house in our community has gone up $110,000. Now that's great for those of us who own homes, but that sucks for people who don't. It is incredibly challenging for people who need to move into the housing market today. Think about it. You leave high school, you graduate from Tosh in 2020, you go off to Holland College and spend 3 or 4 years getting a degree to contribute to our community. You go into Tosh thinking that an average house price is going to be $250,000, but you go into Holland College thinking an average house is going to be $250,000. You come out with your debt load, and now a house price that is another $110,000 than you thought when you went in. So when I hear people talk about their concerns about property values, I'll be honest, my heart doesn't bleed that much. I want people to make sure that the equity in their home is something they can leverage for their retirement or for their future generations. But everybody who owns a home in this community has done very, very well in terms of how much wealth they have created in their home, full stop. And so I struggle with that at the very beginning. This housing crisis has been caused by some things that, by mostly things that we have no control over. Interprovincial migration, people moving from Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, that will come here if they want and leave here if they want, and they are free to do so. And a growing population. Some of that population we've really needed. We need to get younger as a community. We know that. We need to have more workers. We need people to start households at an earlier age so they have more kids in order to take care of the rest of us. A pandemic and global instability has driven the cost of housing. Interest rates and inflation, decades of poor policymaking by other levels of government, in particular our federal government, that got out of the housing business and downloaded it onto provinces, and provinces who didn't do anything about it. This is a failure of public policy, and it is a failure of other governments, and it has landed right here in our community today. That list goes on, and those are things that we have no control over. There are some things that we do have control over, and one of them is the need to replace antiquated zoning and planning rules that were based on different economic periods of very slow growth and or decline and exclusionary practices. I wasn't going to, this is in my notes, and I wasn't really going to speak about this, but I go back to this all the time. And I go back to, where did this start? Why do we have R1 zoning? Because they don't have R1 zoning in basically the rest of the world. We have it here in Canada, we have it in the United States. And so my curiosity and exploration into this housing adventure led me down that road. And it's not a pretty reason. It's not to preserve neighborhoods, to keep quiet. It's not to make sure that there wasn't much traffic. R1 housing was created about 100 years ago, both in New York and in California, as a way to keep certain people away from other people. And really, it was to keep black people away from white people. And the excuse that was used as to why it needed to stay that way is because it was going to affect people's property values. That's tough. So I always go back to, okay, what are we trying to do here as a community? The core of our crisis today, and look, we're really lucky. That's not what's driving R1 here, and that's not, we didn't get any of those comments, and I don't believe anyone here in our community is in that same boat. But I think it is important to remember where it started. The core of the crisis today is on demand and supply. The economic reality of housing, both ownership and rental, today is different than it was 20 years ago. It was different than 5 years ago. What is affordable and ultimately attainable for people we share our community with has changed fundamentally. How people live and connect has changed, and the forms that physical housing takes needs to change too. I believe that if we want all of Summerside to prosper, if we want inclusive neighborhoods where grandparents and new parents can live on the same street, if we want better long-term positive outcomes for our children that will eventually assume the responsibility of our community in the years ahead, if we want people to spend less of their take-home income on housing and rent and more on the things that grow our local economy and create jobs, meaningful and rewarding jobs, if we want these things, then we need to be open to slowly, smartly, and gently changing our neighborhoods in a way that enables a greater variety, mix, and density of housing in all areas designated for residential development. And I think a lot of this package has done just that. I think we really need to make sure that we are open to enabling new housing units to be integrated into existing neighborhoods, both as accessory dwelling units, by creating new units within dwellings, and new small multi-unit dwellings. And this, I wrote, this is the key, that are built in a manner that is compatible with the surrounding area, giving considerations to matters such as building height, streetscape, and encouraging the conservation of agricultural lands, the city's social character, heritage buildings, and natural environment. I have this bit on what Summerside has done and how we've been doing a great job on housing and the housing task force, but all that has been touched on. But to follow up on a point Janice made earlier, we really were in the right place at the right time because we were prepared. The previous mayor and council were prepared by initiating a housing needs assessment that identified that we need 200 new units in our city every year for a decade. And when the Housing Accelerator Fund came along, we had just completed the Mayor's Task Force on Attainable Housing. We had all of the policy pieces that have gone into this in place. And so we were in a way, we sort of fell into our lap. And that's why we were 17th in the country in terms of our application, because simply we were doing a lot of this anyways. Now, we didn't have 4 units as of right identified, written down as one of the things that was a die-on hill. we had really talked more about what Councillor McDougall had spoken to, about having an accessory dwelling unit in your home and the garden suite perhaps, and you got an accessory dwelling unit in your home for your 24-year-old kid who can't afford a place to live elsewhere and you don't want them necessarily in your living room anymore, and the garden suite in your backyard for your 86-year-old mother who can't afford a place to live and you don't want in your living room anymore. That's what we were looking at. The federal government, as the federal government does and will always do, created a massive fund to provide dollars to municipalities and put some specifics in that they wanted to see happen. And that happens. We do that as a municipality. We provide funding to community groups, but also put requirements on for things that we want to see happen. And that's how the nature of the dialogue happens with different levels of government. The municipalities in Canada, again, going a little bit off my script here, get way too small a share of your tax dollars. We get less than 7 cents of every dollar for taxes. Bruce, what are we at? PI, 3.5? 3.5 cents. So every dollar you pay in taxes, that's how much is ending up in your municipal government's coffers to do things like build parks, streets, roads, water and sewer, all of the things that make our community tick, to build fire halls, to pay our firefighters, our police officers, to train them, to staff them. And those things are really, really important to us. So money does matter. I think that's a piece of it. I don't think we need to ignore the fact that there is money on the table for the city of Summerside and for residents and for the things that we need. I don't think it should be what dictates our decisions, but I think we need to make sure that we're open and transparent about that. The next piece on our process, and I completely agree with Councillor Adams' comments, Councillor McDougall, everyone. And I really want to touch on something that Councillor Adams said, is it's getting harder and harder for us to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because literally we're not all on the same page anymore because we've lost that page. And that is something that we have seen across this country with the loss of local newspapers that would bring people together with opinions. We would have had discussions in the Journal Pioneer opinion pages. People would have read it. The circulation would be over whatever it is today of 400 or 500. But I think we've done so far as good a job as we can. If we need to mail things out to people, I don't know what the cost is of mailing these package out to every resident, but fine. We've had open public meetings. I have attended all of them. We've spent hours speaking with residents, whether it's in the CUP lobby or on the telephone or in the office or in places like the boardwalk or anywhere else. We're going to have those conversations. So while I don't think, this is something that we've been dealing with and we've been working with, but to a certain extent, this is a bylaw. The process that we put in place for how we engage and reach out on this bylaw has to be the same as the process we do for the next bylaw or for the last bylaw we did or the one before that. And this council has been really, really busy doing a whole lot of things. We've updated our website. We made sure that all the information is available, that there are link-throughs directly. Councilors have been really receptive and open to receiving information. And I think we've been trying our best. It certainly hasn't been good enough, but that's the reality that we're at today. Our actual bylaws require us to simply have a first council meeting, one planning board meeting, and one more council meeting, and that's it, full stop. And this council said we're not doing that anymore last year after we went through a rezoning application. And we made sure to put together information boards and get information out and get out and try and hear from people. And I get it, people lead busy lives, just-in-time lives. They've got lots on the go. And I'm probably the same as you. Look, last thing maybe I want to do at 7:30 in the evening is go stand in the CUP lobby and talk about accessory dwelling units. I'd rather be at my daughter's soccer game. But I'm at the CUP talking about accessory dwelling units because I think it's important, and it's important for all of us to be there. I want to speak to the two changes that we're down to. Again, like I said, we have a full package here that, as it has presented a number of times to council, we've received positive responses, and overall there's a really good document here and a significant proposal. But the two main changes, the buffer zone around the existing residential zoning and the east-west corridor that was referenced earlier with the no large apartments and backyards, was a direct feedback from members of the public that was completely reasonable, and fully supportive of those changes. And then on the issue of 4 units as of right, in particular the requirement of suitable development standards that will ensure that all new row house, townhouse, and apartment buildings, subject to discretionary approval, shall be designed and built in a manner that's compatible with the surrounding area. As I said, giving consideration to matters such as building height and streetscape. I'm in support of those changes as well. I think those strike a balance. I think Bruce is right. I don't think, if this goes ahead, if that's what council decides, and maybe they won't, maybe they will, it's not going to change anything overnight. Your communities aren't going to change. Your neighborhoods aren't going to be quieter. You're not going to have more traffic. Tomorrow, you're probably not going to have it in the next year or the year after that. We've had a lot of development here in Summerside. I think we're moving forward really in a positive way in terms of getting more units online. So I think 4 units as of right, done right, will help our entire community. I think it's a tool that we have, and I think it's an important tool that we should consider using. And in city halls across Canada, this discussion is underway. And it has gone a variety of different ways. I mentioned British Columbia just got in and told everyone what to do. Some municipalities have gone further. Halifax went to 8 units as of right, and 6 stories, I think, anywhere and everywhere. Some have backed out. There have been some municipalities that have said, look, 4 units as of right isn't, we're not doing it. We're walking away from the half funding and the half programs. Overall, most of the municipalities are moving in this direction. This is a direction that is happening not just here in Canada, but it's also happening in the United States. And it's happening in all kinds of municipalities, partly because, as Janice and Sam have spoken to, it being what some housing experts deem a vital policy tool, and for others it's about financial resources for municipalities that don't have enough money. So to close out, I live in an R1 neighborhood with my family. I have young kids. We moved from an R3 neighborhood in the city. Both neighborhoods are wonderful with fantastic people and neighbors. The streets in both are safe. The parks and green spaces are second to none. The look and feel and character of both of those neighborhoods are slightly unique, but both were quiet, they were pleasant, they were warm, and they were welcoming. Thousands of our residents live in mixed-density neighborhoods. Councillors Cameron, Councillor Duran is about a 50-50 split. Councillor McColman, Councillor Snow, Councillor Adams is about a 75 split. Councillor Morrison, I still don't know where your borders go because it's this. And then we have a gap, and Councillor McDougall is probably on a bigger split towards the R1 housing. They're all great places. I've knocked on every single door in the city, spoken to every single resident. They're not all perfect, but boy, are we lucky to have the people that we share this community with. And these aren't the things here. People help each other out in all our neighborhoods. Community and friendship exist in all of our neighborhoods. Seniors and families grow in every corner of our beautiful city in all our neighborhoods. And those aren't the things that are exclusive to R1 zoning. They're what make our city special, in my opinion. And I think that's something we really need to be proud of. I've read every single one of the emails that have come in. I have read every single one of the documents that is here. I've read this planning report so many times. And I understand the concerns. I can understand the initial reactions as well. I'll be honest, when I first heard 4 units as of right, my wife and I looked at each other and gave scrunched up faces. But we spent time afterwards literally thinking about it, thinking, what would it be like if our next door neighbors, it wasn't the family next door neighbors, this is a big family. So what if that was 4 units? It might be fewer people living next door and fewer cars, but across the street or next door, and what would be wrong with that? Now, first of all, again, I go back to those are good homes. Those are homes people are going to come in and tear those homes down and change those homes and change the character of the neighborhood. And I'm not afraid of that. I don't expect that to happen tomorrow or in the next 5 years or 10 years, but over time I think that will happen in a variety of different places. And maybe I'm too optimistic that I think those people are like the people that I found elsewhere in our community, that they are good, they are warm, they are welcoming. It doesn't matter if they live in an apartment or a garden suite or a 4,000 square foot home. There are good people in our community to share with. My few final points here is that this proposal increases gentle density everywhere, not just in the R1 zone. This isn't an attack on R1. Putting more cars and greater density on only R2, R3, R4, R3R, and R5, in my opinion, isn't fair. Residents on streets like Balcombe, Sterling, anywhere between McEwen and Greenwood, and Pope, basically, Victoria, Arcona, Russell, Beaver, Elm, Duke, East Drive, Dakota, already have more dense neighborhoods than those in our R1 zones. If we only make those streets more dense again, we continue to separate our community and fail to build more inclusive neighborhoods for everyone. The next thing I had here is that most, if not all, R1 neighborhoods are well established with single, I already talked about that, so I can scratch it off. The next one we already talked about as well. And I talked about the 200 unit needs. But we can't just have single-family homes in our community and big apartments. And we've got a lot of big apartments being built right now. We've got a lot of 24 unit. We've got 80 unit on the go. We've got at least 160. We can't just have that. That's not going to make for a good community in the future. It's filling a gap that we don't have right now, which is larger density projects, and those are good from a financial perspective. It's cheaper for you as a taxpayer for us to get water and sewer and electricity and clear the snow when more people live close together. But we can't have, I don't want to see in neighborhoods or communities in a city that just has big apartment buildings and then single family homes, because that keeps people separated and apart based on what they can afford. So we need a better mix, and we need to sort of always think of it as sprinkle that density gently over everywhere so that it happens slowly over time, so it doesn't put one neighborhood against another neighborhood, so it isn't all on Meadow Heights, or it isn't all on any specific, it's not all on Bluebell, or it's not all in our downtown core, that all of us have something to give and something to take. So I think about how to make our beautiful city and the people we share it with better today and for the years ahead, every single day. I already talked about most of this. Put it all of that. I talked about all of it. I don't want to go on too long. But I get passionate about this one because I think it's really, really important, and it's a really big issue. And I'm really interested to see where we end up. But as I said at the beginning, as my role mayor is to chair meetings and to provide leadership. It's also to sit on all council committees and vote in the case of a tie. It isn't to come in and make everyone happy. It isn't to get all of the information to every single resident and expect every single person to read it and make an informed decision. I think that's what happens at an election time. You look at what changes have happened, what changes haven't happened, what decisions have been made, and then you provide feedback through that. You provide feedback as the process goes on. I don't expect, or I wouldn't expect, everyone to be an expert on all of this or to be involved in all of this. We want to make sure that your opinions are heard, that they are listened to, that they are absorbed, and they are considered, and the decisions that we make are for the benefit of our whole community. And last, I guess, my other commitment I made was to always listen with intent and act with thoughtfulness and purpose, to do my best for our city every single day, to think of the big picture and do everything I can to try and make people's lives better than they weren't if we weren't all here trying. With that, I don't love everything in here. This isn't perfect. But where we're at, I support and agree with the staff recommendations. I'm grateful for the input that we've continued to receive and will receive, and the changes that have arisen from that input. So those are my overall comments. So at least, again, like I said, I'm not asking everyone to necessarily agree with me, as I don't think anyone is always expecting everybody to agree with each other, but I think it's important for everyone to know where we all stand and where we think and where we're coming from on this. So those are my overall comments as a member of Planning Board and Council. Councilor?
I just have one final question. Samantha, what is the timeline if this was to pass and it was approved and it goes to the province and they come back and say, yahoo, go ahead. What is the process or the timeline before we receive the 5.8 million? Is it a year? Is it a 2 year? Is it a 5 year? The 4-year, right?
So there's actually a very formal reporting schedule. So the city reports on each initiative every 6 months and every year.
Right.
And the $5.8 million is, up to $5.8 million is divided into 4.
Right.
So when the city signed, it received let's say 1.4 million. And the timelines are reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And at the anniversary date of the signing, which will be December of 2024, if the city is not meeting scheduled timelines,
Right,
funds are not awarded.
okay.
Okay?
So when we after we've received the 5.8 million and we've.
Over
made
4
su-
years.
Over 4 years. And we've made sure all the checks didn't bounce, then we can then we can change it back, right?
If
There's
you-
a process. There's a process, right, that we have to go through. But I'll assure you that everybody will have something in their mailbox if I'm still here. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll read the recommendation back, but I didn't thank Janice and Sam, and also thanks to Thane and Linda and Aaron and our own tech services department. I know the hours and hours and hours that have gone into this above the other day-to-day stuff that we do anyway. So, and any projects that you and your team are already working on, I mean, just it's obvious the work that everyone has put into this. So thank you all so much, and I know we're not done yet. So, so the planning board recommendation, and just to remind everyone that the members of planning board will, I guess it was already seconded by Councilor Morrison. We will be not deciding anything this evening. So the final decision will be made a week from tonight, Monday, at our monthly council meeting. Council will come together, and that's when we will vote on the issue. So, planning board recommendation: the proposed amendments to the city's official plan, as articulated in official plan amendment OP 39, and which includes the repeal of the 2008 East-West Connector Secondary Plan and Zoning Bylaw CS-40, which includes the repeal of Zoning Bylaw SS-15, be recommended to be approved by council. Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor Morrison. All members of planning board, all in favor say aye. Aye. Against? There are none. Sorry, I just blanked for a quick second. So that will go to council a week from tonight. And we'll come together again and probably not discuss as much at length, but we will continue the discussion that night as well as needed. So. And yes, by all means, public residents, continue your feedback, your emails, your calls. We welcome that and we encourage that and we allow that right up until the time of that meeting. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Mayor Dan.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank all councillors, staff, Sam and Janice, and members of the public who have sat with us for this evening, and those who have joined us online. We really appreciate all the time that you've taken from your evenings, and wish you all the safe travels home. Hopefully it's close. Some of you are walking, some of you are driving, but hope everyone has a wonderful evening here in beautiful Summerside. And with that, we'll adjourn our council meeting for the evening. Thank you.